So we're week 6. We have one more lecture for this quarter, week 8, with Ben Russell, who's a filmmaker. So come for that. Today is Gretchen Frances Bennett. And Gretchen has a keen and sensitive eye and ear for what she finds on the side of the road, or on city streets, or in pulp culture images, or in lyrics on the radio, or in a book review from the New York Times. And she collects them and relates them to visual art and literary art historical references. She points to and makes nuanced odes to the things she notices. She makes these odes out of whatever material seems true to what she is noticing, or she notices things that make sense to the material she's working in. Her practice is rooted in drawing, writing, and collecting, but she also uses clay and plaster, stickers and sticks, music, and video. She pays particular attention to her internal and external landscapes and the effects of weather patterns and light and dark impulses. This is what she says about some drawings she has of her car that on her Tumblr site. Images 6 through 10 depict my tan 2004 Buick Century driving through South Seattle. I track this Buick's many mirror images, a spectrum of tans. Each car is equally as nondescript as my car, while also notable for its ability to reflect mine. This articulated line of sedans through time and space feels as if it were one monochromatic field in which I see and place myself. Gretchen was selected to receive a special recognition award for the Betty Bowen this year. She completed a postgraduate studies semester with Vermont College of Fine Art. And her recent exhibitions include ditch projects in Springfield, Oregon, the Hedreen Gallery at Seattle University, the Seattle Art Museum, Olympic Sculpture Park, Vignettes in Seattle, Heel Gezellig, Grimm Gallery in Amsterdam. Her work was included in the 2010 Seattle Art Museum exhibition Kurt, and she helped found the arts collective Seattle Catalog, CCAT, and she currently teaches at Seattle University. So let's welcome Gretchen.
Thank you, Shah, and thanks all for having me. I see a few familiar faces, and hello to you and hi to you all. Thanks for coming. I want to show you some of my work. It's in a non-linear chronology, but before I start, I wonder if you all would do something for me and think about the idea of I'm gonna towards the end of this lecture, I made you little placards in between images that sort of break it down to the things I've been thinking about. And towards the end, I have a placard that says the idea of the intersection between desire and encounter. And another way to look at that is, what are you looking for? And in the context of that desire, what crosses your path? So I wish that you would think about that. And another way, what I'm really asking you is, what matters to you right now? What feels like it's at risk or at stake? You know, what do you use as mapping points or for in order to establish identity? It was brought to my attention recently that I think it was in a sort of under the topic of transgender, how visual signifiers can really be touch points for identity. And yeah, so I'm just wondering what matters to you right now, and if you would hold that thought. Yeah, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So I'm learning about the touch screen. Whoops. Yep. Great. And just to let you in on my process, this feels performative to me in that there's some things I want to say to you. I want to engage with you and remember that you're here with me. And there's some things I really want to read to you just because I can't formulate them verbally like I can on the page. And what Shah just read to you about the tan Buick that my father gave me is an example of that. So my name's Gretchen, and I make pencil drawings. They're either color pencil or graphite. Can you guys hear me okay? Cool. And for these drawings, I work with source material such as photos and digital stills, translating these to drawings, sometimes by projecting the image and drawing it on paper, and later drawing from the memory of the projection. I also, in the case of this particular drawing that I have projected, which is the size of a laptop, I like seeing it on this screen. I also think a lot about the space between abstraction and representation, and I want to begin today with a pivotal body of past work called The Killing. And for The Killing, the process was that I put a piece of thin paper over the screen, and I had pulled stills that resonated with me from this serial television show on Netflix and iTunes. And I drew the abstracted patterns of light, basically, through the paper, just basically writing or drawing in these rain-like marks directly on the screen. And then working from the memory of that later as I pinned these drawings to my studio wall. Oh, look, I can use the clicker too. These works, all the works that I'm going to show you, this is an older body of work from the last 2 years, and then in the last year I've embarked on a larger format colored pencil drawing body of work still in progress that I'll show you. But the works first appear to be photorealist color pencil renderings, but second read shows that they're actually interventions between daily moments and gestures and everyday life experiences. These drawings are based on a collection of images derived from the serial television show The Killing, which tells a crime story set in Seattle. My studio questions actually feel, if not forensic, they definitely feel like I'm looking for cues, just to contextualize for you why a crime story. And another reason why a crime story is that I was thinking about myself in the landscape, and that's what I desired, was to place myself in the landscape. And then I started watching The Killing because it was based in this landscape that you and I are in. So that's what crossed my path. I'm interested in the blank unknowables that are mixed up with visual perception, how we perceive the world through our eyes, as well as the problem of how to represent it. And I'm interested in different types of seeing, everything from the casual glance, the empathetic look, to the detached gaze, all filtered through the window of this particular flickering piece of popular culture, this television show. This retelling comes loaded with DNA of contemporary Norwegian horror films and British psychological thrillers, and of what we already know or think about this landscape that we live in here in the Pacific Northwest. This source material from The Killing is itself a retelling, a remake of a Danish television series, The Crime. Another dark and rainy and mysterious part of the world is how I imagine it. Drawing with deliberate attention given to the mark is critical to this process. Through drawing, I want to show my thinking. I did pick a vertical mark, and for the most part, it makes me feel like, the process feels seismic to me, like I'm a magnitude Richter scale recorder, even though it's on a really small scale. For this work, the laptop screen acts as an uneven mirror as images from the killing produce small shocks of recognition as I glimpse myself in this television show. I was really stopped in place when I first saw the main protagonist because of the way her intake of air and her stoicism and her posture. And I realized, yes, I am an American melting pot, and yes, I am a stoic Nord. And it really called to me, it really called that out in me, and I'm happy to look at it. I'm particularly happy with this. It's a little washed out on your screen, but I'll show you a bigger image later of this image. Because it shows a Sasquatch-like figure silhouetted with sort of the crime photos on the bulletin board mimicking these drawings hanging on my studio wall. And I included some screen grabs from my collection that I didn't choose to translate into drawings, or not yet, but that I'm always thinking about which side of the screen I'm on. Diary, examining the urgently near, which is also the ubiquitously near. I'm currently at work on a long-term project of large format color pencil drawings and some writing. The writing is even newer than the drawing. And they all feel like textual entries to me. They all have become very diaristic. This is a study for a drawing called Untitled after Bruce Nauman. And here's a detail. This new work titled I Am a Recorder uses thematically linked written essays and drawings translated from photos to evoke and illustrate the terms and rituals of daily life, and using as its starting point my daily lived experience. Through a large format series of colored pencil drawings and nonfiction writing, I'm mining moments in my daily life which point past themselves to something recognizable on a larger scale. I'm hoping it's something recognizable to you all. To understand where an impulse leads. In spending time with this imagery, something happens, the difference between thinking about doing something and doing it, tying into the fact that I never actually understand where an impulse leads if I fail to follow it. If I do follow it, its effect upon my life and point of view can be phenomenal. This is another study. And before I made these two studies, I would have said I don't make studies. But this is a study for a drawing called Untitled after Leigh Bowery, posing for the painter Lucian Freud. My vision for all of these drawings and texts is that they exist together and they make one large neutral field that includes the viewer and in which the viewer can place and see themselves. I imagine these drawings together as installation, forming a neutral color field where each work and its relationship with the other is by no means the whole story. There's always the suggestion of something more, possibly less than what their imagery promises, each one forcing its effect upon the other. This constant deferral is the propulsion of the work. With this work, the representation or the imagery I choose to depict acts as a heat, pointing past itself to depict larger themes of personal and historic memory in the context of the everyday. This work agrees with the Joycean theme that each individual is both unique and archetypal. Here's one last slide of the killing, the one I was referring to earlier where the crime photos. Well, yeah, let's just say this is how I feel in my studio. This work marks the new work, the colored pencil drawings, mark a departure for me. In the past, I've worked with popular cultural references, working from stills, as you've seen from the killing, grabbed from online video footage and translated into pencil drawings. I now want to foreground my personal experiences in order to gather reflections on time, destruction, connection, and larger culture, on daily life. Where once I depicted popular iconic moments in order to express the personal, I now depict my personal moments in order to examine the larger work. This has taken me from an outwardly directed focus to an inwardly directed focus. And this is Leigh Bowery posing for the painter Lucian Freud. I placed myself through the phenomena of the killing in its landscape story for a while, and now I place myself within the personal phenomena of showing you my everyday life. I can only tell my story. I'm thinking right now about the filmmaker Sofia Coppola when she was asked why she only portrayed human experience that seemed privileged. Her response was that she could only portray the life that she had lived so far, and being the daughter of a prominent filmmaker put her at places like the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles and in an upscale hotel in Tokyo, I think is where Lost in Translation was set. And thinking about this gives me the courage to tell my own story. Drawing, I follow posture and body position through such cultural touchstones as the artist Bruce Nauman and the painter Lucian Freud, including Freud's portraits of performance artist Leigh Bowery. When I think about Leigh Bowery, he isn't always naked posing to be painted. He was a rather audacious stage performer, and what I think about Bowery is how he would hide certain things by covering up parts of his body, sculpting his body, and then in that way he could reveal other things. And I think it's interesting that even here, where he is fully unclothed, he still seems to be wearing a mask of some kind. This is called Untitled, after Leigh Bowery posing for the painter Lucian Freud, and it's about 50 inches tall, or a little over 4 feet, which is the largest that I've ever worked. It's colored pencils, and the reason I upscaled is I think of my mark as a pixel, and I wanted the DPI, which is a digital world reference, but I wanted it to go up. I wanted the resolution to go up. So my mark stayed the same, but the field enlarged. And another new beginning for me was that I have just recovered a little over a year from orthopedic surgery because I jumped from a rock to the sand on the 4th of July, 2013, and smashed my tibia plateau. One knee bone came down on the other. And this break, weirdly, was just what I needed. I don't recommend it, and I don't ever want to do it again, but I'm not endorsing that. But yeah, I keep remembering that I didn't fall, I jumped, and I was trying to beat the tide. And in this particular moment of vulnerability post-hospital, I wanted to take a shower, and I needed to cover the bandage of my knee, so it's in a black plastic bag. And even though you can see on my face that this is the last moment in the history of my life that I would want to ask my partner to snap an iPhone photo of me, I thought of Leigh Bowery, and I needed to follow that impulse. During this same time of convalescence, I documented this moment of me laying on the bed, examining the space around me and thinking of the limits of the body, and thinking about Bruce Nauman's video called, I think it's called, I just want to remember her name, hang on. Elke. It's called Elke Allowing the Floor to Rise Up Above Her, Face Up. And Nauman talks about this phenomena that if you lay on the floor for a half hour or more, you can feel yourself sinking into it. And I thought about this a lot in the 3 months that I was waiting to walk again with my cat there. You can see her as an anchor. She even seems to pull the bed down a little bit. It's at a tilt. So I made a video of myself by taping my iPhone to my closet door and picked a still, and later, when I could go back to my studio, translated it. And I started, coincidentally, drawing for half-hour increments in my studio in order not to get anxious, because I wanted to see the whole drawing right away. And so I would abstract it for myself and just do a rectangle at a time as I felt myself sink. Here's a detail of that drawing. In most cases, I draw from a projected image of a lived moment, and later I draw from the memory of the projection. In this way, the lived moment gives over its energy to the projected moment. As the focus of the work has shifted from pop cultural references to more personal references, so has the color palette, to become more discordant and tender. And here is a still from Bruce Nauman's video, Elke letting the floor rise above her, face up. Reflection. In the same way I caught a glimpse of myself in the killing, I also see myself reflected in daily life. Here is my tan Buick. And in fact, this is not my tan Buick. It's one that looks just like mine. What I started thinking about once I noticed that there were a lot of tan Buicks in the Central District in Seattle where I live, and that almost no one driving them fit my demographic, is this larger neutral field that I existed in that could allow me to feel a part of something bigger. It could allow me to drop off empiricalistic, you guys know that word, right? Empiricalistic notions. I know the word notions, and I'm saying it. And also, it was like seeing myself outside of myself, and that became a really important revelation, even obsession. Which I think has lost its zh for me now. Like, I think the energy around that, I've played it out, but it became really important. And as Shah, I'll just recap what Shah read. This articulated line of sedans through time and space feels as if it were one monochromatic field in which I see and place myself. Here's a door panel. This drawing is a panel of color, a rainbow, while at the same time it's of a utilitarian door from an old plain sedan, a gift from my father. And there are two doors here. Here's the second one. One from my car and one from a twin car. I no longer know which is which, and this is the neutrality I'm looking for in this work. This confusion opens up space for more than just me. Here's a detail so you can see the mark. And you can also see, I very deliberately showed you here where I'm drawing half-hour increments at a time in the form of organic rectangles. This is called Messenger, thinking of Velasquez's Las Meninas. One morning when I was convalescing, although I have to say it was 6:30 in the morning, so I probably would have been still sipping my espresso on the bed anyway, but at 6:30 in the morning, my partner, Steve, came to say goodbye, and him framed in the doorway was another impulse that I needed to follow. So I took an iPhone photo of him while he talked to me about something like the electrical bill before he went to work. And when I give you references such as Velasquez's Las Meninas or Lee Bowery posing for Lucian Freud, these are by no means the final, ultimate meaning of these drawings, but they are just the doorway. They're the reason that they're the thing that stopped me. And in order to notice, you need to stop, just a momentary stopping point. And then after that, I want the mark to be the content. I want you to feel the affect of me using the drawing as a repository for my anxiety when you look at it. And I'm hoping you don't have to feel anxiety, but hopefully you feel something coming from the drawing, and you don't have to think about Velasquez when that's happening. Here is a detail from that drawing, and these are all 50 inches at their tallest or widest point. So within my life, there are moments I wish to isolate and translate, so I take a picture. But that picture is not enough. I have to draw that picture. And then that picture is almost like a note or a suspension of the moment between the drawing and the lived moment. It's the drawing that makes the moment come alive in the way that I see it. It's by drawing that moment, pinning it to the paper, and through making multiple rain-like marks that I can convey to you what I saw. When I'm making these drawings, I think of the surface becoming like water and light, so that the imagery of the drawings is coming into view one moment, and then the next it's blown out. The surface shimmers, and the viewer, by simply viewing the drawing, seems to accidentally penetrate that surface. I deliberately make this work to exist in a liminal space between realities, not fully rendered and not abstracted. And I think I'd like to back up and say I didn't set out to deliberately make it that way, but I accepted that that is how it's happening. As if between waking and sleeping states not wholly aligned. This produces iridescence. I choose the palette so that it appears nearly monochromatic, sitting in a space as if it was only a glimpse of something, as if you touch it, it would move away or fall. And every day when I go into my studio, I think, is there just one colored pencil I can remove from this palette? Like, I'm really trying to narrow it down, because no matter how narrow I make my palette, there's always color. And I have to be honest, I'm really uncomfortable with that. I'm using the paper not only as the surface where I make the drawing, but also as a screen. Back to the screen. Like a screen which holds a projected image. I draw the images so that they appear on the paper fully rendered, but they give the impression that they remain static, only until conditions change, such as the lights being turned up or the viewer changing her position. Missing information in the drawings, lost through layers of iPhone and copies, printouts and memory and projection, is important. The missing information, just like the space between the marks, are the gaps where I can let you in. Oh, and I should back up and say this is called Augustus, and I'm not sure I can explain to you why I drew this Boston Terrier through time and space. It's now a deceased pet of a dear friend, and I know it's dangerously close to sentiment. It's a pet portrait, but it is also a drawing which pays a debt for a favor that my friend Jonathan once did to me. And when I had this gut feeling that if I started to draw it, I would know how it fit into my body of work. And it hit me like so shockingly. And I'd like to think it's not only cute, but ghostly. But the shocking part was that I really started my art career when I went to grad school at Rutgers. If you go to Rutgers, please study with Hannelina Rogeberg. And I found all this trash on the streets in Brooklyn, and at the same time, I met this Boston Terrier in Seattle, and his owner, and they were really dear friends of mine, and they tethered me to this place as I worked in that place. So it was like, Gus was like a transmission stream for me, or I guess I was the one on the leash. So drawing him made me realize where I started noticing these things. Here's a process shot, so you can see sometimes I draw square by square. And again, that's this space between abstraction and representation that is really important to me. And there's an artist that's sort of been a muse for me lately, Honda Takeshi. He lives in a small village in the mountains in northern Japan. He has a series that I'm really taken with of drawings called Walking in Mountains. And he describes it this way: the daily experience of living with nature is essential to the understanding of the subject matter and the making of the work. And he goes on to say that he consciously aspires to traditional Japanese view and practice, the artistic expression of the intimate relationship between nature and people, To make his drawings, Honda grids out a photograph and then methodically recreates it square by square. This is called Ceiling, and it's pretty washed out here, but I'm hoping you get the idea. I have a popcorn ceiling in a 50s style bungalow, and I took a snapshot and translated into a kind of constellation. And one of the things I was thinking about were Vija Selman's Starry Skies, and how she's, I think, talking about time and devotion, and about looking up. And there's one. Vija Selman's Celmins. She also talks about, I think it was in Parquet magazine, she talked once about whenever she made a drawing or a painting, it was like making a home for herself. I want this work to hold the viewer. In an installation context, I'm looking at this body of work as one larger neutral space, as I form space around the viewer, a monochromatic space, where viewers see and place themselves. Lost moments, what's left behind, artifact. There's some things that I impulsively take a snapshot of or record or write down, and they don't become text or drawings. They re-enter the stream from which I pulled them. The extra linguistic qualities of my work. I want to introduce you now to some work that I started in 2010 when I was on an artist residency with the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. At the time, it was located on Governor's Island, which is a windswept island in the New York Harbor with sometimes gale winds coming from different sides. In fact, this was 2 years before Sandy and 1 year before Irving, and there was a near hurricane level wind that came through there. So the crowns of the trees all ended up on the ground, and I started pursuing this because something had left the order of the tree and become, and it started entering into what felt to me like the ordering of language. And you could say that that language was American English, but it's not limited to that. I wholeheartedly think it could expand to something pictorial and flow into other lexicons and language. But this body of work is called Windfall Alphabet, and this is an A. Here's a collection on my studio floor. This work, titled Windfall Alphabet, is a stick alphabet made of found fallen twigs. Some have been fired into charcoal. With the sticks that have been fired into charcoal, each black letter points past itself by becoming the thing it might draw. It's both a stick and a piece of drawing charcoal. This blackened stick alphabet is like a secret hobo code, and being charcoal, there's the possibility that it will leave a trace. I did a solo show at Vignettes in Seattle. It's a one-night-only venue, which I think is about at the end of its tenure in its current iteration, and I'm excited to see what Vignettes will become. But so I put, one of the people I was thinking about was the artist Paul Tech, who worked between New York and the Netherlands, mainly in the 70s, I think. I was thinking about his alphabet, and he wrote it in the same way that I've installed it here on the floor of the gallery space. This alphabet has a stutter. It's iterative by nature, coming from a process of extracting from the external environment and recapturing a selection of repeated parts. Here's Shah. I did a project in an online venue called Vignettes. And in fact, Shah had a project 2 weeks ago with Vignettes, where I invited people on the Vignette site to come and take a series of what I called windfall walks through Seward Park in Seattle, and then photos or documentation was you could scroll through it every day on the Vignettes site. And this went on for, I think, 5 or 6 days. And this was leading up to a project that I had been commissioned to do for the Drawing Center, where I returned to Governor's Island and did a similar walk, collecting, sort of a language retrieval walk, I guess. This is another still. This is this Vignettes curator, Sierra Stinson, on a windfall walk in Seward Park. What ended up being really important about these walks was the oxygen, the conversation, the line that was drawn through the woods on the walk, as well as thinking about this stick collection. I also made a book with Publication Studio down in Portland, Oregon. They're an on-demand publishing house, and the book is also called Windfall Alphabet. Here's the beginning of the Windfall Alphabet. I really wanted to spell the word Ruskin after the writer and critic John Ruskin, who I think practiced mainly in the late 1800s, mid to late. And here's how that translated to the pages of the book. So I went to Governor's Island on a June day in 2012 and did this drawing event. I decided to lay the collection of sticks at the end of the walk on this piece of canvas, which ended up feeling like a piece of paper to receive the letters. Here's the iterative quality, the stutter. So now we're revisiting the thing I ask you to keep in mind, the intersection of desire and encounter. I want to play a video for you. It's the length of a pop song, and it's based on a pop song, Cat Power's I Don't Blame You. And the reason I chose to sort of cap my presentation with this today is it brings together a lot of things that I have been thinking about. It is an intersection. It brings together my way of noticing. It brings together the extra linguistic qualities that my practice holds. It becomes increasingly centered on an idiosyncratic version of language and a traditional. I really read a lot. I've been very influenced by Barthes the Neutral, Roland Barthes, and also his books, Morning Diary, A Lover's Discourse, Camera Lucida, and I'm going to butcher this name, but Henri Lefebvre, his texts on the everyday, and Certeau also writes about the everyday. Yeah. And Michael Taussig, Mimesis and Alterity. Something about the senses is the subtitle. Reading, writing, a practice in the context of those things has become really important to me. And musicality. And I've been taking piano lessons, and I'm going to get myself a little keyboard, and I really feel like, I don't know if that's the start of a post-studio career or a somewhat post-studio career, we'll see. But this piece was shown in the Brotman Forum of the Seattle Art Museum in late 2010 in conjunction with the Kurt Show, which was a show I also had some drawings in, and it centered around just what you might think. The Nirvana, the rock band Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain, also from this landscape. And I think to continue talking about abstraction and representation, I'm going to play a musician, Garrick Dress, made a remix version of the song I recorded. I learned how to play Cat Power's song, I Don't Blame You, on the piano. And I sang it and I recorded it while lip-syncing it with a specific kind of puppet, a snapdragon. Oh, and then that's the everyday is I saw that snapdragon, and it felt really important to me, like something I had encountered that I had long desired, and also puppeted as a child. So I'm going to play you Garrick's remix first, so that you have an abstracted experience, and then I want to play you the video. If all goes well, that's what's going to happen. Ethan and Julia, it worked. Thanks. So here is the video. It's the same length as the song, so it's the length of a pop song, 3.5 minutes. Been around the world in many situations. Been inside. Whoops. I'm going to start at the beginning, okay, you guys? Swinging your guitar. play. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Been around the world in many situations. Been inside many heads in different positions. But you never wanted them that way. What a cruel price you thought that you had to pay for them back for all that shit on stage. But it never made sense to them anyway. Could you imagine when they turned their backs, they were only scratching their heads? 'Cause you simply deserve the best. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. They said you were the best, but then they were only kids. Then you would recall the deadly houses you grew up in. Just because they knew your name doesn't mean they know from where you came. What a sad trick you thought that you had to play. And I don't blame you. They never owned it. And you never owed it to them anyway. I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
Okay,
320.
that's good. So you can click on.
This minute, you will have that as a competition. And then I should like.
Did you click on?
Hey, you guys, stop it. I did it. I don't know if you could hear, but that was filmed in a Reykjavik coffee shop. My partner Steve operated the camera, and at the very end, he asked me, "Do you want to blow something up?" And I say, "Isn't lip syncing, I don't blame you, with a Snapdragon enough?" So thank you very much. Are you thinking about your question? See, I came with a question for you. Ethan, is this the one? Can... Did they do it?
It'll light up. Hold it down for a sec. Why don't you use it? You can take it off.
Ha. Do you guys have any answers or questions for me? Yes.
I was just wondering if you would be willing to talk a little bit more about your drawing techniques and your just like the way
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the question was, could I elaborate on my drawing process for the smaller screen size graphite and also the colored pencil? So for the graphite, when I started watching the killings, I immediately had the impulse to grab stills, and then I edited them, and I would pull them up on my laptop screen, and I found this really thin rag paper, white paper, that I would rest on my screen, and then I drew the impressions of the light with usually like a 3H or a 4H graphite pencil. And there's this great artist, Suan Kwan, who I studied with at the Vermont College of Fine Arts, and she suggested that I really pick a specific practice around these. I think part of it was there was such a small, concise space in which to realize it. So I decided to do a vertical mark. I decided to avoid contour and build meaning through layers of gray. Seurat was a hero of mine for that, which is weird because I always thought he was boring, and then suddenly he was so exciting to me. The same thing happened with the Impressionists, right? Suddenly I'm like a YouTube impressionist drawing with colored pencils and tracking light, and I had thought, wow, there's nothing, they don't have anything for me, and I was wrong. So, and I also kept track of how long it took me, I kept like a journal, a time journal of how long I worked on them. And in the end, it came out really coincidentally that each drawing would take about the length of an episode of the killing. And I found that really satisfying. And I would have thought it was really contrived to try that, but since it came out the back end, I was happy. And for the colored pencil drawings, I tried to think about what a palette that wasn't saccharine would be. And I thought, if I could just eliminate all the sweetness and really have a straightforward palette. So I took out all the pinks. Although there was one Tuscan red that when I spray fixed it would turn pink. So then I learned to do tests. So I was pretty involved with the palette, and I feel like somehow that's part of the fabric of the work. And I have them laid out on my floor with a little lamp on them so I can see them, because a lot of times I'm drawing in the dark, living in that same light that my pulled images come from in a lot of instances. And I roughly draw for a half hour at a time, and then I'll take a break and then come back to it. Did you have another question about it? So I think that's about it. When I get up close, there's an abstraction, right? And I'm tracing and tracking light. And then I'm anticipating that that's also the experience of the viewer. So then if I turn the projector off and back up, it starts to represent. And then I draw from the memory of the projection. And I think that probably anticipates and parallels the viewer experience. Is that helpful? Cool. You bet. And what was your question?
I was wondering, besides the change of form of the killing, in what ways do you add different contextual elements to your drawings?
Is another way, can I reframe that to say you're asking me how I show what I'm thinking about? And you're also, I'd love to answer that. And also you made me think, the writer of the killing, Venus Sud, I think is a really excellent writer, and also linguistically that fits in with my work. And she's done some short essays on feminism that are interesting, are really beautiful, actually. I think that the palette choice is showing thinking, because I'm really trying to get a different point of view. In the same way, there's this great text by Merleau-Ponty called Cézanne's Doubt, and I think that's where he talks about Cézanne can draw a sphere of a white asparagus sphere, and he can draw it as if you, the viewer, were a man on the moon, and you're like, I've never seen Earth. What is that? Even though everyone knows what an asparagus sphere is. So I'm thinking about how I can look at things alternately, and so that thinking is in there. That is a really good question. I think I'm thinking about home. I think I've always thought about home. Like, how does one feel at home, and what does that mean, and how is that tied in with identity and landscape? How am I formed by the things around me? I think that's in the drawings. I think that's it. Yeah, for now. Yes. Yeah. The blue jacket.
Thanks. Between representation and abstraction, what do you mean by the word translation? Do you use it while you're talking about when you take the photo and translate it to drawing?
Yes.
Does the word translation here fall under representation or abstraction? How do you see it?
I think it falls under abstraction, but I'm only guessing because I don't mean it linguistically for once. I mean this transposing, like the mediation between me and the model, which is what the lived moment that I chose, and between the snapshot becoming a screen image, becoming a print, and becoming a drawing. I mean those layers of mediation. They act as, I look at them as filters. I think about Philip Guston a lot. Yet another reference, but the way he could draw and say things, but he used a simple line and sort of went back to the child. To put vitality into his work, to talk about something as vital as life, but there are things that he couldn't have otherwise said without that line, I think. So I've created a similar filter, or I'm seeking that same filter. I think it's in process for me. Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes?
Would you think of hurricane winds and computer screens as collaborators?
Would I think of hurricane winds and computer screens as collaborators? Wow, what a good question. I think I think of motion and stillness when I think of both of them. So now I'm finding the overlap to answer your question. You're reminding me that Shaw and I, when we talked about this, me coming here, we talked about static and how static can mean, again, that sort of filter or mediated space. It can be something stopping and inert and really still. It can be a breaking apart. So I think my answer would be yes. Did you have a particular idea about it?
Not really. We're studying material engagement theory.
Material engagement theory?
An agency and our
Mm-hmm.
the different components that kind of intersect.
And I love this word collaboration, collaborators. Yeah, I think it's important. John Berger talks about if the model's not looking back when you're done, you haven't gotten close enough, you haven't collaborated. I think about collaboration in that sense, and again, that's about the mediated space and trying to close it. I'm certainly having to do mind gymnastics to close the space between a computer screen and hurricane winds, and I think the only answer I come up with is yes. I really want to think about that more. Yes.
Can you elaborate on why you care so much about placing yourself?
Oh, yeah, I will. I think it's from feeling disoriented. I think it's because I feel at home in more than one place. For instance, I often feel a longing to live back in Brooklyn, where I lived when I went to grad school, and then I stayed there for a few years after. But yet I was really called to come back here where my genes were assembled, where I really know this place. And I remember walking down Brooklyn Street, and I could smell pine, and I needed to go find the potted plant in the midst of cement, that the tiny pine tree, and here it's everywhere. and I think when I moved back here, I knew it was a deliberate move on my part, coming from deep desire, but I needed to know why. Like, why am I here? And I thought about that through non-iconic views of Kurt Cobain. And now I'm thinking about placing myself in my everyday and seeing if it emanates outward. And another way to look at that is seeing if it takes me out with it, since I want to be in more than one place at the same time, which is another reason music and writing appeals to me, that it moves laterally, and you know, art seems to exist vertically in a lot of ways, although that's changing, right? Now we could have a whole discussion on Benjamin and David Josselet and art in the age of mechanical reproduction and aura versus buzz. But yeah, the lateral movement, I think. But I need a base. So I try to place myself and then think, how does that emanation happen? How does what I do communicate with you? Yes, yes.
You use the term linguistic, but also extra-linguistic. And I'm really curious as to, could you just expand on that and how that relates to the work that you're doing?
It's a term I first heard used in regards to Nina Cannell's art. And I think it gives me room to maneuver in the context of language, and it says that language can be a visual lexicon, but it says that it can be text. It says that objects can act as text. I like this question, and I think the answer is I can picture myself moving into a flow, right? It's a non-static state, this extra-linguistic state. Yes, the blue shirt.
You mainly do your medium and pencil. Has it ever been, which is kind of a bare basics of all the mediums in which you can do your art with, color right and everything. Has it ever been difficult sticking with that as opposed to all the other mediums we have paints, acrylics, and all that other stuff?
No, I think the reason is I wanted to learn color theory in a way through using this. That part of that exploration was the energy for me to pursue this medium, and that I'm still exploring that. So as long as there exists a question, it still engages me, and I'm not ready to move on to another medium. And I think also materially, the pencil allows me to keep the mark the same, where maybe I could do that with the brush, but it somehow doesn't feel the same to me, to make the field expanded and keep the mark the same. I've curated one show, and it was all paintings. Like I love that window, that literal framing. But I just don't think that it's my medium right now as a maker. But I do think, wow, filmmaking and music and writing, singing all sound really, really engaging to me. So I guess my answer is no and yes. Yes.
You mentioned space and time quite a bit, which is something that I'm interested in, especially because a lot of your work is based off of photographic material, which is very referential to a specific space and time. And I was wondering if you could elaborate more on what you mean by that, if it's like referring specifically to photographic material or something else. Does that make sense?
It does. I think for me it's about story. It's about narrative. It's about foregrounding my own personal experience to tell a story. And I'm not sure what that story is yet, but Shah mentioned this idea earlier about attaching the personal to the historic. I think that that's what it's about for me, is how to describe my time through telling a personal story. and that all these entries hopefully add up to that larger story. These things I'm referring to as diaristic and textual entries. Yeah. Yes?
I'd like to ask you the question that we've been asked to students to answer in our class this quarter.
Okay, good.
We're taking a 3D printing class where we're looking at it from all different cultural perspectives and just all different perspectives. And the question that we've been asked is, in a world that's saturated with stuff, what idea is worth turning into more stuff? And I'd like to know what would your answer be?
And that's a question I ask myself. Oh, yes, so, and you can help me, but so in a world, a question that some of you have been asked this quarter to ruminate on is, in a world where there's already so much stuff, how do you decide what has enough weight to like be made or become? Yeah? And I think about that, and I feel really resistant to creating more stuff. And I think that is another way I think of my work as extra-linguistic. Like, go out there, but exist sort of molecularly, like a fabric, rather than a big thing. And yet, I still wanted to explore making bigger. And the way I could do that was to make something that hugs a wall, and it doesn't invade the space. So, in other words, a large format drawing. Yeah, and that is a particular kind of space that the viewer can still feel like they can step into. So I think it doesn't have to be anti-monolithic, and that's a whole different thing. But really large work can be really lovely, but I can't justify it at all for myself. And I think that's why I love film, music, because it takes so much consideration to think, what should I add? That said, there are specific things I would definitely make room for, like books, and they can make a big pile. They can become monolithic, unit by unit. Yeah. Yes?
So I feel the value in that you get from your process and finding understanding about yourself and your sense of place. And how do you think about balancing that with your intentionality and the messages or meaning that someone else might gain from looking at your piece?
I think it's partly controllable and partly not controllable. I feel like you're asking me sort of how do I control it or gauge it or steer it, maybe. And for me, I can ask myself what I ask you guys, like what's at stake for you right now. And I can keep that in mind so that when it crosses my path or a version of it, I can be ready. And the other thing is I can read things that I think are going to inform this process so that it just gets folded in. Because if I read things and I understand cultural aspects around me, I can kind of tap into them, like a little oyster spat attaching to a rock. Like it's for me, that's how I notice, is I sort of prepare myself. I have readiness by picking. I only have so much time and focus, right? And I'm still always open, but by picking these things that I'm going to be reading and thinking about and noticing, and then in the context of that, or desire, in the context of that desire and that set of things I've chosen, kind of wait and see what crosses my path. And I don't even have to wait, in a sense. I just have to go to the grocery store or go to my classroom or wake up in the morning. Yeah. Yes?
So during your making process, do you find yourself internalizing or kind of coming outside of yourself?
I think it's super internal. Because there's so much editing, and even, you know, like I showed you that I drew a Boston Terrier named Gus, and I almost didn't put that in. Like, I feel like there's this really internal process that if it works, then it becomes external. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what I know right now, yeah. It's egoless. Like when it works, it's egoless. Like I stop trying to make my thing and I start joining into something that's just already being made. And that's an internal process for me. It's even like a spiritual process, I think, yeah. Yes?
How would you respond to someone considering the work you've done with the killing as fan art?
As what?
Fan art?
Oh, I'd be okay with that because I think I am a fan. And I also think I have the ability immediately to get distance from it and think it could be something else. It got too visceral for me after season 2, so I haven't watched it. Or it didn't get visceral, I did. I started having a visceral response to what I read as really violent. But it's sort of, I have a placeholder. Like, I'm still going to go revisit it. But I loved the story of the first 2 seasons, and I loved the internal life that was depicted. I think that's the part I responded to most, is that internal landscape. That was super evident, especially in the protagonist, but not only. So I'd be okay. I think I am a fan. Yeah, but it's fandom that's separate from like celebrity worship, or yeah, it's more about the way someone is telling a story, I think. You had a question.
Yeah, you spoke about being in sort of a Richter scale or a reporter.
Yeah.
And also talking about understanding where impulse leads.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, like in terms of your process, as far as is it something that you intentionally like set out to explore something, or do you just find yourself exploring it and then sort of interpret it after?
Yeah, what a great question. I think that the word receiving comes to mind. Like I do subscribe to that axiom where an artistic practice is a process of reception. And I think that's sort of where that's what's moving the needle, right? The gauging activity. What was the second part of the question? About the impulse? So I think that the impulse and following the impulse is a really practical tool for me. I know I'm really anecdotal, and it's not going to stop. But oh shoot, her who is the person who wrote The Year of Magical Thinking, Joan Didion. Yeah, she writes about her husband, John Gregory Dunn, who the book The Year of Magical Thinking is about how they were 2 writers and they would talk about writing and how it functioned. And one day they were having dinner, and I think he wrote things on index cards when he had a thought, and she wrote things in a little notepad, and they were having dinner, and he said something and she said something, and she said, I think I could really use this in my book, but I don't have anything to write it down on. I'll just write it down later. And he handed her an index card and said that it'll just be lost. It'll just go back into the stream of thoughts that you forget about unless you write it down. And so I think that's why I pay attention to an impulse, knowing I can edit it out later. Is if I don't write it down, like there's so many times I'll go back and I'll look at something that I wrote as a note and I'll think, whoa, I don't remember writing that, but that I can't encapsulate it better than that. So really, really glad I wrote it down. And I think that's what the impulse is for me. It's not actually impulsive as in irresponsible. I think it's really being pragmatic and awake, or trying to be awake. Yeah. Yes, way up there.
What role do dreams play in the act of your creative process?
What role do dreams play in my creative process? I want them to play a role. I think sometimes I have a dream and I wonder if it's really happening, if it's like something I should pay attention to. So in that way, I think about it. You know, I think, wow, is my friend really having marital problems because I dreamed that? Or is there really a gun in the house with a toddler? Because that's what I dreamt. I woke up this morning thinking, next time I visit my friends with the 1-year-old, I have to be like, the gun's not like nearby, is it? Because that's what I dreamt of. But I don't know if it directly goes into my work. I just don't know. Do you use dreams? Uh-huh. In the sense like the way the surrealists use them, or?
Well, occasionally I'll create things within my dreams because my dreams are actively creation of imagination.
Yeah.
So sometimes I can pull things out of there and use that as an inspiration for whatever music or writing or even sometimes photography.
Uh-huh. No, that's great. Do you know the artist Matthew Barney? I think he uses dreams. Yeah. Yes.
I wanted to answer your question about what I'm looking for.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess what I look for in life is story and like an image or an allegory or some kind of explanation to help me compass my life and to learn how to capture the snapdragon or these things of inspiration and know how to make on some things and know how to let things go and go back into the stream of consciousness, to the stream you're talking about. Because there's so much, like, and it's almost like chaos. And unless I have that story or that image or that idea.
You know what you're reminding me about is like, it's like you're building a kit, right? And it's like you're building a kit that you can make things from by kind of corralling these things, by noticing them. And you can always recast them off after you live with them for a while. And it's sort of living with something that helps you make that decision of, does it have weight or is it just going to blow back out there? But you're creating the material from which you can work from. And I say that humbly because sometimes I review my slides and I'm like, is there anything here? Like, is it really, like my friend Erin Williams said, that the drawings are so ephemeral that the next minute they're going to fall on the floor? You know, I almost don't make them materialize. But yeah, I think you're talking about something after my own heart, is that collection that you can sift and distill. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yes?
So, I've been trying to think about this most of this time and trying to figure out.
Okay, good.
So, I took a lot of notes. You were talking about wanting to be, this desire to be everywhere at once, or to be multiple places at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
In your slides, there was a slide that said something about the diaries examining the urgently near, which is also like the ubiquitously near.
Mm-hmm.
And I just learned that word, actually, to be honest, like a couple of days ago. And that has something to do with something that's like very, like, it's like all over. It's like
Right, I think ubiquitous is like ever present.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So I feel like it's also kind of examining your own desire in a way, to find that in the everyday is like a good practice for something. I also want to be many places at once, and this gives me a lot of anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
And I think that in the past 2 years, I'm a kind of a fake Luddite. I didn't get a computer until a couple of years ago. And when you talk about screens and which side of the screen that you're on and how you're very aware of that, but you also talk about your own work in a way that you allow missing information to be gaps where we can let ourselves in, to think of the screen as a filter, and that you're like allowing these things, the reader or the viewer, to filter themselves in and out of the work, you know?
Nice.
I guess that's something that made me think. But my question is in observation and attention and anxiety, and how these things, the more I desire, the more anxiety I have and the more things feel like they start to quicken, but your practice seems very like a meditation in a way. And it's a challenge to both the viewer and to the artist, and I'd like if you talked more about that.
Well, I think, and this ties in an earlier question about what will be evident in my work when you look at it, like how will you know what I'm thinking of? I think built into, I think the act of drawing is, my goal is this catharsis, like if catharsis is possible in art, like I need a repository for this energy, and so that's built into the drawing. Like, I don't draw and hope it goes okay. I'm drawing so that it will go okay. Like, I'm giving myself this rectangular space that's like 8.5 by 11 to like deposit something, and now I'll give myself this rectangle. And when I start to feel anxious, is the same as like when you let boredom direct you. It's like, okay, I just need to take a break. Because maybe there's a saturation point, you know, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's part of that's why the representation's like a heat that points past itself. I do carefully edit from what is available to me from the kit that I've collected of source images, but it doesn't have to be that. That's just the thing that came along. Yeah. Thanks you guys so much.